the journey, so hope it worked. We are not beyond that. Somebody back there said we should have been doing a Sarah McLachlan song in the background as we did that. But let me start by saying this. We do believe we are better together. And for us, I just want to say thank you to all of those of you who volunteer in this place. You make this church run, from working with kids and teens to groups and worship and guests and everything that we do here and outreach. Thank you so much for being a part of the journey and the way you volunteer. But if you're brand new here, and we've got a lot of brand new people, let me just kind of tell you something weird about our church. Every single year, about 15 to 20% of our church moves, okay? At the same time, we actually grow by about 15 to 20% every single year too, which is pretty incredible. But we have some pretty amazing volunteers who step aside and move on and leave some holes for us. And so we're inviting you, if you're new or you're newer and you haven't jumped in to serve, to do that today. As you leave today, we've got some incredible people that are out underneath the tent. There's a big Better Together sign. They would love to answer any questions you may have. They actually got a little swag they'll give you if you sign up today. Again, we're not against bribing you either. So anything that it takes. But I hope you'll do that. You can also take the picture or take your camera out and hit that QR code there. There's a link. There's some of us that are wearing these shirts today. Today's the only day it wouldn't be weird for you to take a photo of our backside and get the link from that. So we hope you'll do that, or even the QR code in front of you. We really do believe we are better together as a church, and so we're inviting all of us to be a part of that as we move into this fall and into this new year, all right? Let me ask you a question. What is the most depressing night of the week? It's tonight, right? Sunday night's probably the most depressing night of the week. Unless you're a pastor, then it's actually Saturday nights. Might sometimes be the most depressing, because I'm just kidding, I actually love Sundays. But why are we so depressed on Sunday evenings? Why do so many of us get what we call the Sunday evening blues? Well, it's because work comes on Monday morning. And why do we dread Monday mornings? Well, if you think about it, the week before you just put in all this work. And then for many of us, we have this very busy schedule on the weekends and all these things that we put together so we can kind of get out and about. But what else do we do on the weekends? We still work, right? There's still text messages that come in, or emails, or projects that we're working on. And so we never give ourselves time to actually rest. Is it any wonder so many of us are tired, worn out, stressed out, burned out? Indeed, did some research recently, and what they found was that employee burnout is on the rise. 52% of all workers say they are burnt out because of the work that they do. That's up 9% over pre-COVID levels. Stanford researchers looked at workplace stress and its effect on healthcare and mortality. They found that stress costs companies about $190 million a year, and that stress in work leads to nearly 120,000 deaths every single year. I think it's probably important for us to put guardrails up when it comes to our work. And so that's what we're talking about in this series. We're talking about guardrails that we need to put in place in our lives. Now, some of you may be thinking, why do we use this image of guardrails? Well, let me give you this definition of what a guardrail is. Guardrail is a barrier placed along the edge of a road intended to reduce the risk of serious accidents. Now, if you think about a guardrail, it usually sits in a place that you more than likely could drive where the guardrail is, but that's not really where the danger is, right? Where's the danger? The danger is on the other side of the guardrail. The danger is on the hill or the mountain or the ditch that is on the other side of that guardrail. So in this series, we're saying, what are these guardrails that we can put together in our lives, that we can put up, that will keep us from those danger zones? And so in this series, and today specifically, we're going to talk about guardrails for work. But maybe the simplest question to begin with is, why do we work? Well, we work because it takes us back to the creation story. In Genesis 1:1, it says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And so if you think about that word created there, created is working, right? So here is God who creates. Here's God who works. And we see that creation. We see this work at play as we look at the rest of Genesis chapter 1. So as we look at this work that we do today, was actually established by God in the beginning. But that wasn't the end of that work, right? God worked, and then what does God do with that work? Then God gives that work to humanity. Look at Genesis 1:26. Then God said, "Let us make human beings in our image to be like us. They will reign over the fish in the sea, the birds in the sky, the livestock, all the wild animals on the earth, and the small animals that scurry along the ground." We head over into Genesis chapter 2:15. The Lord God placed the man in the Garden of Eden to tend and watch over it. So here's God who creates, here's God who works, but then God says, hey, I'm going to give this over to you, to humans, to take care of this. And they got a pretty sweet gig, don't they? What they get to do, they get to reign over the animals, they get to tend and watch over the garden. There's this work that they are given. And yet maybe in our minds we have this image that the purpose of the garden was so everybody could just run around naked and play pickleball all day, right? That was kind of the idea, we think. But that's not the idea. God's like, no, there's this beautiful garden, and now I need you to tend to it. I need you to take care of it. I need you to work. We were made to work. Tim Keller was a pastor and author. He said this. He said, the Bible begins talking about work as soon as it begins talking about anything. That is how important and basic it is. Work is a good thing. Work was established by God. But if work is good and work is established by God, then why do we get the Sunday evening blues, right? If work is good and work is established by God, how come we feel so tired and worn out and stressed out and burned out in our lives? Well, could it be that for too many of us, we find our identity through our work? We talked about this in the last series we were in called Undivided. We were talking about politics and religion. And I said that when our identity isn't fully in Christ, what many people will do is they'll go find a political party to find their identity in, because that's what we do, right? We need an identity. We try to find an identity. And something like a political party is an easy place to go and do that. But we also do this when it comes to the work that we do. That when we don't have our identity fully in Christ, our work can become our God. It can become our idol. It can become our identity. But when that's the case, how do we respond to that work? Well, for some of us, we respond in fear. We ask ourselves, we say, if I don't work more hours, or we say to ourselves, if I don't work more hours, if I don't do more work, if I don't add this project to the other projects I'm already doing, I'm never going to get this promotion. I'm never going to get this raise. Maybe I'll lose my job. Or we look at the team that we work with and like, man, if I'm not a part of this, if I'm not there, then this team's not going to do the work that it's supposed to do. I have to be there for them. And so there's this fear because we have our identity in our work that we begin to live by. And it leads us to be more focused on our work than on ourselves or even others. And so some respond with fear. Others respond with guilt. Maybe this is what you think. If I have any empty space in my calendar, I'm a failure. Or if I don't say yes to this project or to this additional work, then I'll lose my job. I'll not get this promotion. I won't get a raise. And even though your mind, your body, your soul is telling you, you have got to take a break, you need to rest, your guilt says, no. You should always be productive. Like rest is for the weak. And so we live with this guilt and we push ourselves beyond healthy limits when it comes to work. And so what happens when all we do is work? Well, I love this quote from Tasha Erick. She's a psychological and executive coach and wrote this in Bankable Leadership. She said, we actually get stupider when we work too much. I think that's kind of true, right? The more work we put in, the more effort we put in, we don't get smarter. It doesn't help us. It really makes us dumber. But what it really does, it really gets us to this place of where we are worn out, stressed out, and burned out. And the more we give to work, the more we begin to ignore ourselves and others. How many marriages do you know that are broken and fallen apart because one person in that marriage found their identity in their work? How many parents and kids have relationships that are torn apart because a parent said my work is more important to the relationship than my kid? How many friendships do you know that don't exist anymore because somebody in that friendship says my work is more important than you? How many people do you know that have had health issues because they have made work the most important thing in their life? How many people do you know that have stepped away from their faith because their work has been their identity their whole life? Like, I think we could probably spend the next couple of hours just telling stories about people that we know in our lives where this has been the case for, right? But some of those stories we would tell are our stories. Some of us would have to say, my marriage broke up. I have a hard relationship or tough relationship with my kids. My health struggles because work was my identity. And yet, even though we know this, we continue to live these lives where work is the only thing that we focus on. And when work is the thing that we focus on, when it becomes our God, our idol, our identity, it will always lead us to brokenness. We'll keep working harder. We'll keep putting in more hours. We're going to keep taking less vacation time. We're going to spend less time with our family and friends. And maybe we're going to tell the people that we say that we love, we're like, hey, I'm doing this for you, right? I'm doing this for us. I'm doing this for our future. And that's why I'm working so hard right now. But all that leads to is more brokenness. Or maybe another one we'll say is, it's just a season. Like, work is just in the season now, but your season's been like 5, 10, 15, 20 years. At some point, that season has to end, but we've become so identified with work that we don't know how to separate ourselves from it. And again, that leads us to brokenness. We don't need Tasha to tell us that we become more stupid the more that we work, right? In fact, we can look at Scripture and see the impact that work has and how in the end, it actually is meaningless. The book of Ecclesiastes, we read this, chapter 2, verses 4 through 10, says, I also tried to find meaning by building huge homes for myself and by planting beautiful vineyards. I made gardens and parks, filling them with all kinds of fruit trees. I built reservoirs to collect the water to irrigate my many flourishing groves. I bought slaves, both men and women, and others were born into my household. I also owned large herds and flocks more than any of the kings who had lived in Jerusalem before me. I collected great sums of silver and gold, the treasure of many kings and provinces. I hired wonderful singers, both men and women, and had many beautiful concubines. I had everything a man could desire. So I became greater than all who had lived in Jerusalem before me, and my wisdom never failed me. Anything I wanted, I would take. I denied myself no pleasure. I even found great pleasure in hard work, a reward for all my labors. Many of us read those words in there in Ecclesiastes and we're like, yeah, that's what I want, right? I want the big homes and the vineyards and the great gardens. I want all of these things, these treasures. I want these for myself. And some of us would even say, isn't that the American dream? Because that's what the American dream says, right? You work hard. You put all this time and effort into this. And all of this can be yours. But here's what's important to understand. This is called wisdom literature here in Ecclesiastes. Well, the wisdom comes right after this in verse 11. Look at what the writer writes. It says, but as I looked at everything I had worked so hard to accomplish, it was also meaningless, like chasing the wind. There was nothing really worthwhile anywhere. For us, we have it listed as verse 10 and verse 11. And 10 goes right into 11. But I kind of imagine as this person is writing this, or even if they were to sit there and they were to read it out loud to people that were around him, as he would read this, I imagine there's this pause between verse 10 and verse 11. Like, here's all these great things and accomplishments and possessions and everything that I've done. And then there's this pause. And then I think kind of slowly who to begin to tell the listener what we have here in verse 11. This person looks at their life and the long hours they have put in, the hard work they have done, the extra effort that they have given. And in the end, what do they say? It was all so meaningless, like chasing the wind. That in the end, after chasing all these things in life, that it wasn't worth it. But we not only find this wisdom in the Old Testament, we actually find this in the New Testament too. In 1 John chapter 2, verses 15 through 17, John writes, "Do not love this world nor the things it offers you. For when you love the world, you do not have the love of the Father in you. For the world offers only a craving for physical pleasure, a craving for everything we see, and pride in our achievements and possessions. These are not from the Father, but are from the world. And this world is fading away along with everything that people crave." Here's John who's saying the exact same thing as we find in the book of Ecclesiastes, that when work is first, when we're all about achieving more or getting more, when that's our focus, we're not living the life that God intended for us to live. And in the end, all of those things are going to fade away. That's why it's important that we put these guardrails in place when it comes to work. But there's a problem, right? And it's the work culture we live in, because in the work culture, there are no guardrails. What do we get in the work culture? In the work culture, we get painted lines. And painted lines are different. Painted lines say, hey, here's a warning. You don't want to cross this line, because if you do, there may be danger. As you see there in this image here, there's no guardrail there. But man, you cross that line, it doesn't look very pretty for you on the other side, does it? But that's what work culture says. Work culture says, I'm going to give you a line. I'm going to paint this line for you, and it's up to you to see how far you want to cross that line, right? For instance, we're going to give you more time off. And you're thinking to yourself, that sounds great. I'm going to get more time off. I'm going to have more free time to just vacation. But then you go on vacation, and what do we do on vacation? We work. We check email. We're on phone calls. We're texting people. And so we get to this place like, well, I don't even want to take my vacation, because if I take my vacation, I'll just end up working. So I'll just end up working more, right? That's a painted line. Or maybe for some of us, they'll tell us you can work from home. And I know that's, we've had the pandemic and a lot of people have been working at home. I know a lot of companies are like, hey, can you come back to work? In some ways, I don't think that's a bad idea. What did we find during the pandemic? We actually worked more when we were working from our house than when we were working in an office. Why? Well, it just becomes normal for us. It becomes comfortable. So we finish up our work day and we maybe eat dinner with our family or by ourselves, whatever it may be. And it's like, I got that Excel spreadsheet I need to finish. I'll just continue to do that, because that work life or that work world has brought itself into our home life. But that's what work culture does. Work culture says, hey, we're not going to put up these guardrails. We're going to put up these painted lines, and too often we cross them. And too often that means when we cross those lines, we are more worn out, stressed out, and burned out in our lives. And that's why we hate Mondays. So what guardrails can we put in place to find the health we need? What guardrails could we put in place so our relationships aren't struggling, but they are thriving, they are strengthening? What guardrails can we put in place so we aren't always tired and always worn out and always stressed out and burned out, but again, that we're growing in our life, that we're thriving in our relationships that we have? What guardrails can we put in place so physically and mentally and emotionally and relationally and spiritually we are more like God created us to be? Well, to find out what that guardrail is, we need to actually go back to the creation story. The first thing God does is work. Well, what's the next thing we find that God does? Genesis 2, 1 through 2. So the creation of the heavens and the earth and everything in them was completed. On the seventh day, God had finished his work of creation, so he rested from all his work. Here's God who spends 6 days working. At the end of those 6 days, God's like, hey, I got to take a break. I've got to rest. And so God rests on that seventh day. Statistics say that you and I, if we're in the workforce, we work between 50 to 60% of our waking hours. My guess is in a location, a place like this, it's probably even a little bit higher than that. We work, we work at home, we work on our days off, we work on our vacations. We are like the Energizer Bunny, right? We keep going and going and going and going. And yet here is God who's like, I worked these 6 days and I rested. Maybe there's something there we need to learn from God. Ben Witherington is a professor of New Testament and a pastor. He wrote it this way. He says, it is perfectly clear that God's good plan always included human beings working, or more specifically, living in the constant cycle of work and rest. See, rest is all about taking care of who we are. Again, physically and mentally and emotionally and relationally and spiritually. And yet for many of us, we just work. We do not get into the cycle of work and rest. Like, this was so important to God that one of the 10 commandments that he gives to the Israelites is the fourth commandment. Here's how it reads. Exodus 20, starting with verse 8, says, "Remember to observe the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. You have 6 days each week for your ordinary work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath day of rest dedicated to the Lord your God. On that day, no one in your household may do any work. This includes you, your sons and daughters, your male and female servants, your livestock, and any foreigners living among you. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens, the earth, the sea, and everything in them. But on the seventh day, he rested. That is why the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and set it apart as holy." Now we have to understand something here about the Israelites. They're coming out of about 4 centuries of slavery from the Egyptians. Now, in that culture that they lived in within Egypt at that time, they did not have any rest. They didn't have any days off. It was 7 days a week. And so you didn't wake up on a Monday morning like, man, I had a really rough weekend. I think I'm going to be a little late. I got a headache. My arm doesn't feel very good. I don't think I can do this work today. If you said that and you're like, I'm not going to work, the Egyptians would basically take care of you. And I mean, that meant that you would never breathe again, right? You were expendable to them. They would get rid of you, and guess what they do? They just put someone else right in your place to continue the work. Doesn't sound a whole lot different than our work culture today, does it? You leave, someone else jumps in your place. You think they need you, they really don't. And so this is the culture that they had. But here's God who jumps in and says, hey, you need to rest. You can't keep this pace up in your life. He's like, look at me. I worked for 6 days, and I had to take a day to rest. And so we have this command to rest. But here's what's so important about rest. It's so important to us because it reminds us that we are called to trust God more. Back to Tim Keller. He wrote this. He says, "We are also to think of Sabbath as an act of trust. God appointed the Sabbath to remind us that he is working and resting. To practice Sabbath is a disciplined and faithful way to remember that you are not the one who keeps the world running, who provides for your family, not even the one who keeps your work projects moving forward." The guardrail that we need in our lives, that we need to put in place, is rest. One, so we can rest our minds and bodies and souls, but also so we can understand that we are fully reliant on God. Because too many of us are reliant on ourselves. And it's about what I can do and who I am and the effort I put in. And God's like, no, you need to rest like I rested. Practically, then, what would this guardrail look like for us? Well, I'm going to share with you something that we just implemented here with our staff. We call it our rest policy. And I know you probably don't believe this. We actually work more than 1 day a week here at The Journey. And our staff, especially our full-time staff, is not much different than you. They work way too long. They work way harder than they should. They work on days off. They work on their time away on vacation. And I say they, and that includes me in that. And so we're like, we can't keep functioning in this way. We've got to make sure that we are putting this guardrail in place of rest. And so in this policy that we actually have these words. It says, when we are on all the time, it begins to affect each one of us physically, mentally, and spiritually. However, we're not the only ones affected. It also affects our marriages, families, and other relationships. And in the end, it makes us less effective in ministry, thus hurting the very mission we are on together. We need time to find rest and to relax weekly and throughout the year. And so what I'm going to do is actually just share this with you. And I'm not sharing this with you because I want you to oh, that's really great for you guys. I'm sharing this with you because I really believe there's elements in this that all of us can put into practice in our own lives, that we need rest. And so let me share this policy with you. We use rest. It makes it easier if you do that. So the first one that we have is to rest and relax. Our staff, our full-time staff, is required to take one day off every single week. For most of us, that is Friday. And so if you're texting us on Friday or emailing us on Friday or calling us on Friday or you're asking for a meeting on Friday, unless it's some emergency, you don't hear back from us, it doesn't mean we don't love you. It means we're trying to take a day to just rest, right? And so we take that day to rest, to unplug our phones and to get off of our email and text messages and put our laptops away and not worry about that sermon or not worry about that material, not worry about connecting with that person right then and there. We have got to take a day to rest. And sometimes that, of course, that bleeds into our Saturdays. And so we do try to give a little bit more than just one day off a week. But there's something there for all of us, right? Because how many of us work Monday through Friday, and we work a little bit on Saturday, we work a little bit on Sunday, and we never unplug? It is so important that we unplug from the work that we do. Put your phone away. Do not disturb. Erase your email app on your phone for that day, whatever it takes, so that you can rest. Somebody told me earlier, I'm just going to tell my clients, hey, I'm off that day and I don't want to hear from you. And that's okay, because we all need that rest in our lives. So find a day every week to rest. The other thing that rest and relax connects to is vacation. If you work, you get vacation. How often do you actually take all the vacation that your work gives you? Most of us are pretty poor at that. I am very poor at that and don't do that well. And so this is something I've got to work on myself, to make sure that I'm taking my vacation time every single year. But here's the deal. Too often we go on vacation, and what do? We work while we're on vacation. We'll still do meetings. We'll still do phone calls. Hey, look, the worst thing that can happen to you for not answering the phone call or text message or email is that on Monday you don't have a job, right? Technically, that's pretty bad, but maybe that's the best thing for you. So you can find the rest you need to go on vacation, to take the break that's there. And so rest and relaxation are so key. E for us is exercise your body. One of the best stress relievers we find is just taking time to exercise. That may mean 15 minutes of walking for you, whatever it may be. For me, I come home after work, I change my clothes, go into our gym in our garage, and I work out for 45 minutes, 50 minutes every single day, because that is restful for me. It relieves the stresses that I have. I don't know what that looks like for you, but just taking time every day to just decompress. Exercise your body. Maybe it's even exercising your mind. You stop and you read a book, you journal, you write, whatever it may be for you, but find things that takes your mind off of work and begin to exercise who you are. S is social relationships. When work takes over, we don't engage in relationships, and we know the relationships take time and effort. And so these social relationships are very important, and when I say that, I'm including your families. So if you're married, set up times to date your spouse. If you've got kids, every so often, or for our family, it was when our kids were younger, it was every night we're going to eat dinner together. That was our connection time. Maybe that's what you can implement for yourselves. Somebody says, hey, why don't we go hang out this evening? And you're like, I got this really big Excel spreadsheet I'm really kind of happy to be working on right now. Don't work on that Excel spreadsheet. Put it away. Do it in the morning. Go and hang out with your friends. It's so important that we have relationships with other people. That's why we invite you to be in groups here at the Journey. That's why we invite you to serve here at the Journey, to build those connections and relationships. And work, when that's our identity, will kill the relationships in our life. So social relationships are important. And this last one, I've shared this one a couple times, is time with God. Here's what this looks like for us here, and I think this is something we could all put into practice. The first thing that we have here is to divert daily. It means Every day you're spending a few moments with God through prayer and reading scripture. Maybe if you like to write, you can do that too. But you're finding time each day to divert daily. You're withdrawing weekly. For our staff, we are asking them to take, all of us, me included, to take an hour or two every week where we just kind of focus on our time with God. And again, I know it's a little different because of what we do here, but maybe for you it's finding an extra 30 minutes or an extra hour that you can just do that during the week, to withdraw weekly. Then there's Quit Quarterly. This is a big one for us that we've implemented through this over the last couple of months. But for us, it's finding a half day, and we just go away somewhere. It's not at our house, so we're not sleeping. We're not watching Netflix. We're not on our phones, but we're going away, and we're just reading scripture. We're reading a spiritual book, whatever it may be. We're spending time with God outside of our normal space. And again, maybe for you, that's something that you could implement. And then lastly, Abandon annually. For us, this is our staff retreats that we do a couple times a year, like a half day. But for you, maybe taking a vacation day and saying, hey, here's what I'm going to do with this half day. I'm going to spend this time with God again. I'm going to go somewhere. I'm going to read. I'm going to write. I'm just going to contemplate, whatever it may be. Maybe for you, it's taking a hike, but there's something you are doing that you are finding rest from work and you're connecting with God. Because in the end, it is about the rest that we can get for ourselves. It's about the relationships that we can strengthen with others. But it's about being able to trust and know that we can fully rely on God in our lives. Yet for too many of us, work is our identity. And yet as I look at God, and I look at what God did in the Bible, I see over and over again that yes, we're called to work, but we're actually still called to rest. And in this rest, there is blessing. There are three things that God blesses in creation. God blesses living creatures, God blesses humanity, and God blesses the seventh day of rest. Back to Genesis 2. On the seventh day, God had finished his work of creation, so he rested from all his work. And God blessed the seventh day and declared it holy because it was the day when he rested from all his work of creation. God blessing rest means rest has this divine favor from God. That when we make rest a practice in our life, there are blessings with it. What are those blessings? Big homes, new cars, great vineyards, lots of possessions? No. It's better marriages, stronger relationships. It's connections with our kids. It's us not being stressed out, worn out, and burnt out all the time because of this connection we have with God, because we have found this rest. And in our rest, when we are truly reliant on God, there are blessings that God will send our way. What's keeping you from resting? And what's something that you can begin to do today to put that guardrail of rest up in your life?